Good evening. It is 6 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. This is the Kitsap County Public Works Stormwater Division open house on our proposed fee rate schedule for the next 5 years. My name is Kim Pleger, and I'm the Communications Manager for Kitsap County Public Works, and I'm happy to welcome you to our open house this evening. So I just want to do a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Tonight's presentation is being recorded and it will be shared with the participants after the meeting this evening. You should probably be receiving an email by Monday with the recording. For tonight's presentation, we will have a couple presenters, and then at the very end, we have allocated time for Q&A. So if you at any time have a question in your mind that you would like to ask the panelists, you can use the Q&A button and type your questions into the panel, that button there. We'll address those all at the very end. And then lastly, I'd like to just let you know that there is live transcription available. So if you need closed captions, those are available for you. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Michelle Purdue, who is the Senior Stormwater Program Manager at Kitsap County Public Works.
Very good. Thanks, Kim, and welcome everybody this evening. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate that you're here. So as Kim said, I am the Senior Program Manager for the Public Works Stormwater Division, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time with you here tonight talking a little bit about who we are, what we do as a division, and why, and then really take a deep dive into what you're probably here to hear about, which is our stormwater fee. So our stormwater division is funded by an enterprise fund, which is supported by fees established by Kitsap County Code Title 12. This is billed as surface and stormwater management fee on annual tax statements. And basically what they do is they pay for all of the activities of our stormwater division to carry out our stormwater management program, as well as meet our regulatory needs. That, for those of you that may not know, is our NPDES permit that's given to us by the Department of Ecology. Those are some requirements that we have to be able to meet as a county. So for the past 6 years, we had a rate schedule that stepped up gradually. Those rates sunset at the end of 2023. So it's been our practice as an agency to take a look at our rates periodically to make sure really that we're keeping up in a way that continues to provide the level of service to our customers. So in this round, we hired FCS Group as our consultant. So I'm joined here today by Matthew Hobson, the project manager from FCS Group, and John Ghilarducci, the principal from FCS. They're going to be talking a little bit about what went into our rate study that we did earlier this year and what those results were and how that kind of shakes out. FCS was a really good choice for us. They have a wealth of experience providing rate studies to utility providers and agencies just like ours, including doing the original rate study for stormwater in Kitsap County, as well as recently for our solid waste division. So next slide, please. So as I said, I wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are. We are a relatively small group. We have just over 38 employees, and we call ourselves small but mighty. And you'll understand a little bit more about what I mean by that a little later in the presentation when I show you all of the amazing work that this group does on behalf of the environment and clean water in Kitsap County. So we have 3 core teams. One is our water quality group that includes our education and outreach, our water quality monitoring, and our spills program. We have our asset management group that does our mapping and our retrofit engineering and our business inspections. And then we have a fairly large group that comprises our maintenance and operations. And basically their core job is to take care of the miles of storm pipe and the hundreds of facilities that we have around the county to make sure that everything is just functioning and doing exactly what it's supposed to do on an ongoing basis. So as I mentioned earlier, we have regulatory requirements that we have to meet. We also want to make sure that we're giving the level of service that our customers have come to expect from the county as far as stormwater goes. That comprises a lot of things from maintenance to improvement projects, from large to small. And I'll show you a couple examples of those a little bit later. But also, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention as well, it's not just our core group of our Stormwater Division employees, because it's really impossible to have as many skill sets as we need to have to do all of the numerous things that we need to take care of at any given time in-house. We also maximize our staff by using some strategic partnerships. And there are two in particular that really move us down the road, in that direction. One is the West Sound Stormwater Outreach Group, which includes the Kitsap Peninsula cities, as well as Port Angeles and Gig Harbor. And they all work together to maximize the reach of our outreach programs across the area. And then our Clean Water Kitsap partnership, which is several agencies, including the Kitsap Conservation District, the Kitsap County Public Health, WSU Kitsap, Kitsap PUD, and then obviously ourselves. They help us to amplify all of our work region-wide. And so our motto really is many hands, one mission for clean water. And it really takes all of those hands to do that job. Next slide, please. So mission, vision, and values, those can be kind of boring statements, and I'm not going to read them verbatim off the screen to you, but you can see them up there. I think what you can distill out of this is that we have a really strong environmental commitment. So, a long time ago, back in 2009, the county committed to a policy that said, we wanted to treat water as a resource in this county. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just pushing it away and disposing of it, but we were handling our runoff in a way that was environmentally sustainable for years to come. So, here is our mission, vision, and values, and in our core, but also beyond this environmental commitment that we also have some internal commitments, and that's to provide excellent customer service, to make smart investments to keep our rates affordable, and to keep our local streams and water bodies clean. So that's kind of what we're all about and what we believe in. Next slide, please. So going back to the issue that's at the core of all of this, what really is the problem with stormwater? Well, the Kitsap Peninsula is a really unique place. You probably already know that because you live here. We have 250 miles of shoreline. We're bounded by Hood Canal and Puget Sound. We are dotted with recreational lakes and streams. And really what that says is we are all about water. And so Kitsap County Stormwater's goals to reduce flooding, restore natural function and habitat, and reduce pollution, those really support our larger mission to protect the quality of Kitsap's surface waters, to support economic growth and our recreational activities, as well as sustain that healthy natural environment. And we depend on our stormwater management program to do that. Some of the key things that you can see that cropping up in is making sure that our drinking water, our recreational water bodies, our shellfish beds, salmon streams, and again, our critical water bodies like Puget Sound, we want to make sure that those remain safe and as clean as possible for the communities as well as the creatures that depend on them for years to come. Next slide. So Simon Sinek always says you should start with your why. And why do we do this? Well, the easy answer would be to say, I mentioned earlier that we have regulatory requirements from our NPDES permit, which, enacts the requirements of the Clean Water Act, to our county code and policies, and then at its very basis, our level of service standards. That would be a really easy answer. I could also say, there is some risk if we don't do what we do. Service failure happens with aging infrastructure occasionally. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of all that infrastructure that's already in the ground so that it doesn't fail and cause issues. Every year that we defer maintenance, that we don't do it in a really holistic way, it makes maintenance and replacement more costly. So it costs us more in the long run. We also need to keep up with growth. But really what I want to focus on is that one right there in the middle. And that is that, our why is really doing the right thing. Your core values are really our core values too, because our families and our employees, we live here too. We raise our families here. We know the value of these precious water bodies that we're trying to care for. We know the value of wanting to recreate in the water. We appreciate the fact that we have salmon runs in our stream. And, we've heard all the stories about protecting our key species like orca and making sure that we're keeping our water bodies as clean as possible so that they can continue to thrive. So the what's in it for you is really the same as what's in it for us. We have a passion about protecting our natural resources. Next slide. So really, I just wanted to say, for us, this is kind of our mantra. We view stormwater management not just as a problem to be solved, but really an opportunity to create more resilient, sustainable, and beautiful communities. And you see a really prime example of that in the background of this slide. That is the Manchester Stormwater Park. And so, with projects like that, it's not just about taking runoff and making it go away, or treating it and making it go away. But in a lot of cases, it is the desire to make that functional for a community as well, and to try to give back in our communities where we can. Next slide. This is a slide I really love. I talked a little bit earlier about our very small team and all of the big work that we have to do. All of those items on that page are things that we're responsible for. So, there's a lot of elements, and there's a lot of pies that we have to have our fingers in at any given time and excel at. So what we try to do at all times is to use some really innovative solutions to make sure that we're addressing those problems. For us, because we're small, because we have so many things that we have to do, we look for ways to be as efficient as possible. We really rely on our innovation and strategy to keep that level of service, the regulatory requirements met, and ensure efficiency in our use of our public funds. So we're always looking for ways to improve our program to be more efficient and effective as we go. Next slide. So I just wanted to give you a couple of visuals of the services that we provide in our division. And you may have seen some of these as you're out and about in your community. That can look like our green stormwater solutions, like rain gardens and bioswales and things like that. That center picture right there shows a really attractive one with some educational signage. Off on the right there, we do projects that restore fish passage and habitat. Same thing with that center one down in the middle. And so they can look like that. We do projects that address and reduce flooding. So a good example of that is down in your right-hand corner there. That was the recent flooding at Point No Point, where our stormwater crews responded to that until we had that under control. It also can look like doing things like helping citizens make better environmental choices that affect the places that they live and love in. That could be like our Mutt-Mitt program down there to ensure that people have ways to pick up their pet waste and know why they're picking up their pet waste before pathogens can get washed downstream and into our precious water bodies. We also do a lot of technical assistance. Up there in the left-hand corner, that's one of our inspectors providing technical assistance to one of our citizens that's looking to make improvements in his location. Next slide. So no matter what you do, you don't just do it to do it. We have to know that it's working. So a really important part of our program is to monitor, to evaluate, and to do that adaptive management to make sure, like I said, that we are being as efficient and effective as possible at all times. And the numbers are really telling us in all of the metrics that we're monitoring right now that it is working. We're making some positive strides in the environment. And these positive strides collectively have translated to a better quality of life for all of our Kitsap citizens. So, a couple of those good examples up there is, I want to point this one out. Since 2010, we have upgraded over 1,700 acres to a higher level of water quality through our large and small retrofit projects. So that's pretty significant. 218 tons of pet waste was picked up last year. That is 218 tons of pet waste that did not go into streams or local water bodies. So that is pretty significant. And that keeps improving as we go on. Next slide, please. So that was a little bit about where we've been. And here's what the road ahead looks like for us. So our industry faces several significant challenges over the next few years. I mean, that is the reality of how it is. We're going to be obligated to meet those challenges as we go. Some of those things may look like rising costs and supply chain challenges in both our operations and maintenance programs. It's getting harder to get the materials we need at the prices we need. They've gotten a lot more expensive. It's gotten a lot more expensive to do our large projects, our capital projects. We're running into supply chain challenges, which makes things more hard to get a hold of and more expensive. That's one of the pressures our industry is feeling. One of the big ones that you've probably heard a lot about is climate change, and along with that, increased severe weather events. So again, I'll point back to something like the event up at Point No Point. So that was an isolated event right now. We may be facing more flooding events like that in the future. We need to be able to prepare for that. We need to be able to be resilient and be able to react to those things as they come. Something else that you may have heard about, or maybe not, there are emerging pollutants of concern, along with some increased regulations that go along with that. Recently, in the last few years, there's been some study about a chemical coming off of tires called 6-PPDQ that kills coho salmon before they're able to develop. So those things are coming off of our roads. They go into our stormwater. They go into our water bodies. We are going to need to meet some sort of response to that. And there's going to be regulations that tell us how and why we're doing that. So we need to be able to be resilient and be able to meet those. And finally, and this is a really big one for us, a lot of our infrastructure has been in the ground for a long time, and it's not infinite. So, just like anything else, it ages, it deteriorates, and eventually it needs to be either repaired, replaced, or, upgraded, depending on the situation. There's a lot of it. We're going to spend a lot of years just getting to everything that we need to get to as far as our aging infrastructure goes. So in order to meet all of these challenges, our stormwater program has to be strong and vital to meet both these regulatory requirements as well as protecting our public health and safety. Next slide, please. And with that, that's a little bit about the why. And I will turn this over to Matt and John and Devin to talk a little bit about the how we're proposing to try to meet those challenges.
Yeah, great. Just do a quick sound check that my volume is okay. Can you hear me, Michelle? Great. All right. Well, good evening. I'm happy to be here with our team from FCS Group. I'm joined tonight, as Michelle mentioned, with John Ghilarducci and Devin Tryon. FCS Group, just very quickly, we are a local firm. We've been in business now for over 35 years. With offices across the Sound in Redmond, as well as in Spokane, and then we also have some offices in Portland and in the Boulder, Colorado area. FCS Group, over the last 35 years, we've focused on providing financial and economic consulting services to local and state governments like Kitsap County. Over the time frame, we've completed over 4,000 similar rate studies for stormwater, water, sewer, solid waste, and electric public utilities across the Pacific Northwest. As I mentioned earlier, John Ghilarducci is serving as the principal of this study. He is also the president for FCS Group, and fun fact, he was part of the original team that helped establish the county stormwater utility several years ago. And then Devin worked as the consultant, completing the technical and economic analyses for this study. I served as a project manager, and so I coordinated with Michelle and her team to carry out the study since we began this effort about a year ago. And just as context, I also worked as the project manager for FCS Group, assisting the county in its solid waste rate study, which was completed a couple of years ago. Next slide. So FCS was contracted by the county's Public Works Department to complete a rate study for the stormwater utility. And like other public utilities, the stormwater utility is an enterprise operation of the county. And what that means is, instead of being funded by taxes, stormwater services are funded by user charges, which are assessed to residential and non-residential customers. The purpose of a rate study is to determine to what degree the level of these user charges are sufficient to support all of the financial requirements of the utility. So we've been working with Michelle and the other members of the county team over the past year to identify these financial requirements and to develop rate recommendations for the next 5 years. So from 2024 out to 2028. The presentation I have prepped up tonight is about 15 minutes. And then after that, we'll be able to respond to any questions that any of you all may have. Next slide, please. We adhered to a methodology that is widely used throughout the industry to complete this rate study. At a high level, the study followed 5 key steps. I'll summarize those fairly quickly here. First, we wanted to define the financial management framework for the utility. We want to make sure that the policies and guidelines for operating a well-ran, financially sustainable utility are established at the outset. What that means is we set parameters around achieving certain financial metrics related to maintaining minimum operating reserves, as well as minimum capital reserve funding for any unanticipated emergencies or infrastructure costs. We also developed a revenue forecast for the stormwater utility based on the existing approved rates. I'll talk a little bit about that here in a bit and why we're focusing on that financial forecast on revenues. And then we completed a financial forecast of the utility's operating expenditures. And those would include things like wages, benefits, supplies, and the program support costs for the county's partner agencies like Clean Water Kitsap. Once we identified those annual ongoing operating expenses, we layered on top of those costs the anticipated capital project expenses that are part of the stormwater utilities stormwater facility master plan. So when we have that information together, what we want to do is we want to look at all of our costs out into the future and compare those costs on an annual basis with the rate revenue forecast if we hold rates at their current level. We want to make sure that we understand how long existing rates can support the utility and the timing in which that no longer is the case, as well as the recommended rate action to bring revenues up to meet all of the financial obligations. Next slide. So I'll talk sequentially through all those steps briefly. I'll start with that financial policy and management framework. We identified 4 key policies to build within the financial forecast. And these policies focus on ensuring there's sound financial management on an annual basis for the utility. The first one, which is very common to most of us in our household budgets, is we want to make sure that there's what we call an operating reserve or a savings account. The operating reserve is designed to manage just fluctuations in cash flow from month to month. What is unique about the stormwater utility is why it assesses those charges to every customer. The stormwater utility only collects on that revenue twice a year when property tax bills are sent out to residential and non-residential customers. So 2 months of the year is when all the revenue is received, but there's 12 months of expenses each year that have to be incurred. And that operating reserve provides that cushion, that liquidity cushion, to manage the inflows and outflows of the stormwater utility fund. The second reserve policy we explored was a capital reserve policy. While the operating reserve manages those day-to-day costs of wages and benefits and supplies, the capital reserve is designed to manage and mitigate the effects of emergencies or natural disasters and the impacts they may have on the stormwater's utility infrastructure. They also provide a funding mechanism for each year's capital project plan. And so the minimum level we've established for the capital reserve is about $1 million. That doesn't say we want to only hit $1 million each year. That's the bare minimum, acknowledging that there will be capital costs each year. We want to make sure that there's funding available to meet those capital project expenses. A third policy, which I'll talk here in a few slides, is something called system reinvestment funding. I'll speak to that here in a few slides. So I'm going to skip to the last one. And the last policy is making sure that our revenues not only meet our expenditures 1 or 2 or 3 of the 5-year period, but that revenues are sufficient to meet all expenses on an annual and sustainable basis. Next slide. So when we talk about system reinvestment funding, going to Michelle's point of the why, and she explained a little bit about the infrastructure requirements of stormwater. These challenges are not unique to the stormwater utility. They're not unique to Kitsap County. These are pressures being placed on public utilities across the country. And the reason for that is utilities such as the stormwater utility are very capital intensive enterprises. What I mean by that is it's relatively costly to safely and efficiently move drainage runoff from a home across the entire county through the watershed. The same idea that it's relatively expensive to move 1 drop of water from a water treatment plant all the way to someone's home. And so we depend on infrastructure to accomplish these services. And these assets age over time, and they need to be replaced to avoid unanticipated failures or emergencies. And across the country, this is the #1 issue for public utilities. It's figuring out how to fund the replacement of aging infrastructure. These pictures, these aren't pictures of Kitsap County's infrastructure, but they're designed to show some real world examples of failing infrastructure that needs to be addressed. Next slide. The funding challenge of replacing infrastructure is compounded by the expectation that local governments like Kitsap County will be the primary or the only resource agency to take on most of these funding requirements. The existing infrastructure across the country that's aging and reaching its useful life, when it was first installed, it was largely subsidized by the federal government. This chart here shows the percent of capital funding historically that has come from the federal government. And if you look at that red line there, that runs horizontally across the graph. Federal funding has declined over the last 50 years, and the local governments are responsible now for picking up that slack. Next slide. So the best practice in public utility financial management to address this funding need is a concept called system reinvestment funding. System reinvestment funding refers to establishing utility rates that can cover current expenses, but they also support the replacement of stormwater infrastructure. So our rates are designed to not just pay for wages and benefits and supplies, but also set aside funding on an annual basis for replacement projects in that current year, or simply saved for future replacement projects in future years. I will point out that unique to the work that we do, the county's stormwater utility effectively already does this. Over the years, the utility has budgeted for annual retrofit projects as part of its operating budget. This is an example of a best practice that we don't often see. The county has been prudent about consistently putting this practice into place. And as you'll see in later slides, by consistently applying this practice, it does help to mitigate significant rate increases. And also it reduces the reliance on debt to fund capital projects. Next slide. So following our review of the financial policies, we then develop a financial forecast of operating and capital expenses. And that whole point is to evaluate the adequacy of our existing rates. I'll cover some of the items in a little more detail here in the presentation, but at a high level, what we found is if the county were to hold its rates at existing levels for stormwater fees, that the revenue forecast would be sufficient to pay for all operating and maintenance expenses over the next 5 years, as well as existing debt service. However, the current rates, while sufficient to meet financial reserves and capital reserves in the short run, would be inadequate to meet those reserve requirements over the next 5 years. Similarly, while we have sufficient revenues and reserves in place today to fund our capital projects in the first couple of years, looking out beyond the 2-year horizon, we do not have sufficient revenues and reserves to meet those future capital projects. Next slide. Just in terms of some context for the bases for the operating and maintenance forecast, we used the county's stormwater utilities 2023 adopted budget as the basis for the financial forecast. And then we adjusted each of those expenses on an annual basis based on some recognized cost inflation indices. At a high level, we're forecasting customer account growth, just natural population growth as well as migration into the county, at just under 1% per year. General cost inflation, we're forecasting somewhere between 2 and 5% per year, a little higher in the short run as we're all seeing higher cost inflation currently. And then the expectation of the forecast is towards the latter end of the 5-year forecast, we'd see hopefully inflation going back to long-term historical levels. At a high level, our operating expenses as a whole, we forecast increasing by about 4% per year. I will point out that while we see operating expenses growing at about 4% per year, if you look at the middle box in the top row where it says account growth, we anticipate account growth at 1% per year, or just under 1%, and that would be the primary growth in revenue, is just having more customers. Unfortunately, if our account growth is only growing by 1.7% per year, but our expenses are growing at 4%, what that means is every year we're going to have less and less cash flow to devote to capital projects unless rate action is taken. Next slide. So I've been using the word capital a lot. I just want to provide a little bit of context of what that means. As I mentioned, the capital expenditure forecast we're using is based on the county's 5-year stormwater facility master plan, which includes $17 million in identified projects. In addition to that $17 million, there is also $15 million in retrofit projects, which are to be funded through the operations budget of the county. So in aggregate, the county is identified roughly $32 million in replacement projects, as well as other capital projects. Now, rates won't be the only funding source for these. The county has already identified or been awarded $6 million in ecology grants to support these projects, and is allocating roughly $1 million in real estate excise tax revenue to support the capital program. Next slide. The next 4 slides will just provide some graphical illustrations of the financial forecast. The first chart you're seeing here is a forecast of the capital improvement plan cost forecast. What's unique about capital projects is, they're lumpy, as I put it. They're really tied to the type of project and the timing of that project. They're not really consistent in terms of spending, and so that's where reserves come into play. That we can use rates as well as that savings account that the county maintains to balance the spending and the resources to manage the fund. Next slide. So if the county were to hold rates for stormwater fees at the current level, that the forecast you'll see here, that rose bar chart, that forecasts the ending cash balance for the stormwater utility over the next 5 years. You can see it declining over the time period. By 2028, it would be just over $2 million. Now, we talked about those financial policies, maintaining minimum capital and operating reserves. If we look at those minimum reserve levels, those would be illustrated by that dotted black line that runs horizontally across the chart. So while if we held existing rates at current levels, the utility would still have some reserve funding left by the end of the 5 years, it would be well below good management practice, and it would be inconsistent with the county's financial policies. Next slide. So based on our analysis, we are forecasting that the county would need to increase rate revenues for the stormwater utility by 2.5% each year over the next 5 years. And that 2.5% annual rate increase would be sufficient to cover all operating expenses, to fully fund the capital improvement plan over the next 5 years, as well as to keep operating reserve levels above the minimum targets as established by financial policies of the county. Next slide. The chart here shows the same forecast of our projected cash balances for the utility. Once again, the rose columns are our projected fund balance, and the dotted line is the minimum target. I want to point out here that, as I mentioned, it's good management and financial practice not to run the reserves right to that minimum level. One reason behind it is we want to make sure that there are reserves available to meet capital projects in each current year. And we also know that we can anticipate that there'll be capital projects beyond this forecast, for example, in 2029. And having resources available in reserve helps to manage the annual increases to stormwater rates so they're not volatile or unexpected. Next slide. So I'll just, we're going to wrap up here the next couple of slides. I want to talk a little bit now about the actual rates themselves. Stormwater customers are assessed an annual charge, and that's based on what we term as measured impervious surface area. Essentially, it's man-made material, driveways, roofs, as opposed to natural ground cover. Now, this is a common and best practice billing structure for a stormwater utility. The measurement of impervious surface area is then converted to a metric that is termed in the industry as an equivalent service unit, or the acronym for that is ESU. And that's equal to about 4,200 square feet of impervious surface area. That ESU equivalent is what is assumed and applied to any single-family residential customer. So all single-family residential customers are assessed the same annual fee, and that annual fee is equivalent to one equivalent service unit. All other customers, restaurants, large multifamily complexes, schools, they are assessed a charge that scales based on the measurement of impervious surface area on that particular parcel or lot. Now, the stormwater utility has consistently increased this stormwater charge over the past several years. In 2021, the base charge per equivalent service unit was $115, increased by $10 the following year to $125, and the current rate today is $130 per equivalent service unit. Next slide. I want to speak just briefly about a proposed change to the rate structure that was evaluated and is being proposed for the next 5 years. One of the customer groups within the stormwater utility are roads that are maintained by the county. And these roads represent a unique customer group for the stormwater utility, because just like runoff from a residential lot, the Stormwater Division has to manage runoff from both county and state roads. But unlike more traditional customers, like a single-family residential customer or a restaurant, The county road infrastructure also is a vital asset in managing runoff. It collects and transitions runoff from other customers of the stormwater utility. And so it's these customer groups, this county road class of customer, serves a dual role within the stormwater utility, in that it's both a contributor of runoff, but also an asset to the stormwater management system. And it's for this reason that many cities and counties across this region do not assess stormwater charges to roads infrastructure. So as part of the rate study, the proposed rates you'll see in the next slide are designed to reduce the stormwater fees paid by the County Roads Division in such a way that it recognizes the historical and present infrastructure contributions made by the Roads Division on behalf of the stormwater utility, and that it aligns the county's rate policy as it relates to the treatment of road infrastructure to be similar to those policies commonly used in neighboring counties, as well as the rates that are assessed to state roads within Kitsap County. Next slide. So the proposed 5-year rate schedule is designed to generate sufficient revenue to fully fund the stormwater utility on an independent basis. The rate schedule also transitions the existing stormwater charges assessed to the County Roads Division to be equivalent to the rates assessed to state roads by the year 2028. Based on the proposed rate schedule, the annual bill for a single-family residential customer would increase by $11 next year to $141. Subsequent rate increases would be in effect of $10 to $11, and they would be effective January 1 of each of the following years. And just as a reminder, developed properties such as multifamily residential, businesses and institutions, their rates would increase and they would be applied on an equivalent service unit basis, mirroring the increases for single-family residential customers. Last slide, please. And just provide some additional context to the county's stormwater rates as they are today and how they would be projected in 2024. This slide provides a comparative rate survey of some peer and regional stormwater agencies. I do want to provide a little caution when we provide these comparative rate surveys. Many times we are comparing apples to oranges because of the density of the utility, of the population it's serving, and the types of capital projects that are being required or performed for each utility. But the survey does provide just a little bit of context to the fees assessed by the county. Generally, the Kitsap County stormwater rates are relatively low compared to other jurisdictions in the area. You can see that even with the proposed rate adjustment of $11 next year, the county's stormwater rates would still be lower than those of Port Orchard, Bainbridge Island, Poolsville, and the city of Bremerton. And that concludes our presentation of the financial forecast and rate study recommendations. As I mentioned, we're available after the presentation to answer any questions that the audience may have. And thanks for your time tonight.
Michelle, is there anything you want to add before we go to Q&A?
Nope. We can move right to Q&A if you're ready.
Okay, so at this time, I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen just so that I can open up the Q&A button. We do have a couple questions, it looks like. So the first question in our Q&A is, how are we addressing potable well water being passed to the waste treatment system, which is then discharged into the Sound at some degradation of our water supply? Thank you.
Yeah, I will take a stab at that. This particular question, I'm going to dip my toes into someone else's division a little bit because it is both an answer that comprises stormwater as well as our sewer utility. So I talked a little bit earlier about the county's water as a resource policy, which really recognizes that here in our county, we are very dependent on our groundwater supplies because we in this peninsula don't have any snowpack to rely on for, recharging that water supply that we rely on to drink. So basically what that means is we have to keep things as clean as possible because, eventually it needs to percolate down there and become our drinking water supply. In addition, our stormwater codes require development to first try to infiltrate any of that runoff before they choose other options to run it off and get it out of there, so that we're actively trying to recharge that groundwater reservoir. So that's it from the stormwater perspective. But I will attempt to dip my toes again into sewers side of the house. Our sewer utility, in addition to that, is working with our potable water purveyors to treat wastewater to a point where the water can be used for other uses like industrial and commercial uses like irrigation. So that could be another way that this potable water is managed. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, at this time, if you have any other questions, you are welcome to add them into that Q&A section. I'm not seeing any other questions right now. I would also add that if you have a question that you would like to ask the panel live, you can raise your hand and I can allow you to unmute yourself and ask your question to the panel. Okay, it does look like Bob Gilby. I'm going to go ahead and you should now be able to ask your question, Bob.
Thank you. So that was a partial response to my inquiry, but the question is, a certain amount of our waste treatment effluent is discharged into the Sound. And to the extent that that is discharged into the Sound, is the extent that our water table is diminished in some way. So what are the plans for like keeping our groundwater, recirculating that into the ground rather than discharging it into the Sound? Thank you.
I have another panelist on here at this time, and I'm wondering if I can call on him. Andy? This is Andrew Nelson. He is our Public Works Director, and he might be really well placed to answer some sewer questions, which is where this question more appropriately resides.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Mr. Gilby, for your question. Kitsap County, in coordination with the potable water purveyors, Kitsap Public Utility District, Silverdale Water District, Perry Water District, there are many across Kitsap County, are continually talking about this concern that our potable water supplies are dependent upon groundwater recharge because we don't have large rivers in Kitsap that we're drawing our water supply from, and we don't have snowpack that feeds rivers or even feeds our streams here. So it's beyond the conversation about specific stormwater rates and the work that our stormwater program does. But to restate Michelle's comment about the county's water as a reuse, as a resource, we are looking for all ways to conserve potable water consumption, cutting down on the amount of water that is used for non-potable purposes like irrigation, like industrial washing, other kinds of commercial flushing. And then we are working towards getting our wastewater treatment plants that at least the county is operating. You know, we're not the only wastewater treatment plant operator in Kitsap. The cities operate their own plants, and there are other utility districts that operate wastewater treatment facilities within Kitsap County. We are working towards finishing off our treatment plant process that would allow us to create and treat water to the point where it's considered to be reusable. And then that water in a reuse element can be plumbed for uses in industrial area. For example, the new hospital in Silverdale is plumbed to use recycled water for washing purposes, for toilet flushing purposes, for other industrial non-potable types of uses, to then decrease the amount of water that's being consumed from our potable water supply. The other element that we're looking at is to see if there's feasible ways to use that wastewater and deep well infiltrated, inserted back into the groundwater in Kitsap County. There are a lot of permitting processes and some technical things that have to be accomplished before we can get to that level. But we're working with the State Department of Ecology and the water purveyors in order to find means to do that. So that's the best information that I could provide to you now, Mr. Gilby. If there's other things that you're interested in discussing, we could probably point you towards either the water purveyors in Kitsap Public Utility District or to our sewer utility directly.
Thank you. Thank you. My wife and I moved up here from Tucson about 9 years ago, and Tucson is keenly aware of water limitations for sustainability. And there's a huge infrastructure around like non-potable water reclaim being used for golf courses and such. But that's different than the Pacific Northwest, where groundwater is the sole source of potable water, and discharge into the sound is decidedly an exit from that recirculation. So thank you very much, and I encourage you to continue to look at what does it take to close the cycle between groundwater to groundwater. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a good point, and we're headed in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this time? Okay, I don't see any other questions, so I just wanted to talk very briefly about the next steps in our process. I just put into the chat a link to our website, kcowa.us/SWFee. If you want or need more information, you can go to that site. I do want to add that if you are interested in making a public comment on the proposed rates, you can go to that site and submit a public comment, which will be recorded. The comment period ends on November 8th. Following the comment period, the Kitsap County Board of Commissioners will be holding a public hearing. That is on Monday, November 13th in the evening, beginning, I believe, at 5:30. You can go to that website to find out how you can attend, if you'd like to attend in person, or if you would also like to attend virtually. Otherwise, I believe that concludes our presentation. I want to thank you all for being here this evening and listening, and I hope that you were able to gain some new insight into the future of stormwater within Kitsap County. So thank you and have a great evening.